Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. A lot of you guys come to me for questions when it comes to classes in order to find out the perfect class, or better yet, a perfect DPS for you to play going forward into Shadowlands. There's a lot of choices and a lot of you guys have been asking me which one should you play. Is Paladin a safe option? Should you play Windwalker? Or should you maybe go with something safer like a Rogue or a Hunter, where every single spec of that class is a DPS, so hopefully at least one of those specs will be good. Shadowlands beta is still going through a lot of changes, and we can't really talk about the balancing, so I won't be able to tell you which class is going to be the strongest, which one is going to do the most damage. I feel like it's not healthy to always chase the DPS numbers, because sometimes Blizzard can give them, and sometimes it can take them away. So it's a good idea to take a look at different types of playstyles, opportunities, utilities, and more that every single class DPS variant offers. And that's exactly the stuff I want to go over, some of the main key points when it comes to thinking about and figuring out which class and spec you want to play, in hopes that it might make the decision of picking your main a little bit easier. We'll start this video off with a fairly easy class to dissect, which is going to be Hunter. Hunters have very high mobility, so if you're someone who looks for a class with a lot of movement, like Disengage for example, which is a unique mobility for Hunters, then you definitely want to be considering Hunter going forward. Hunters can use Disengage in creative ways. Usually it would be used to back up from an enemy with a big leap, but also if you rotate your camera, it can propel you forwards in a direction that you want to go. Hunters have a very versatile damage output profile in terms of being able to do cleave damage, single target damage, AoE damage, and even multi-dotting based on your spec, so there's a variety of different damage styles and approaches when it comes to this class. One of the specs of Hunter even has no target cap, and that is something to remember going forward into Shadowlands. Target caps are pretty major in terms of they'll be limiting how many targets your character can affect at once. So in a massive trash pack, a class having no AoE target caps can actually give you a massive advantage. In Mythic Pluses, people generally will tend to do big pulls, to just kind of pull everything at once, blow all your cooldowns, burst everything down quickly, and Hunters will have that, at least in one spec, an advantage where they might be able to take advantage of those mass damage combos. Hunters also come with a great set of crowd control between stuns, interrupts, as well as traps, with a variety of different uses for those. You have Purge, which is a reliable utility that can be used in a variety of different situations. That can purge an enemy's enrage effects and magical effects pretty often, as well as an immunity, which can be invaluable inside of a variety of PvE situations. The cons of Hunters is going to be the pet AI, unless you're going to be strictly playing Marksman with no pet whatsoever, and there will be some situations where a Marksman you will need a pet for your group, maybe for utility. If you really don't want to play around the pet AI at all, Hunter will not be a great choice. Because Hunters bring an immunity, outside of that big immunity, they're generally fairly squishy. You have some defensive cooldowns, and based on which pet you run, can give you a little bit extra bolstered defensives, but they are known to fall over sometimes when it comes to taking on big damage. If you don't plan around your big button defensives around those big hits, sometimes Hunters have a tendency to kind of just feign death, except they're not feigning it, they're actually dead. Next we have Monks, and if your mobility is the most important aspect of your character that you want to have at all times, the Monk is the most mobile class in the game by far, with a variety of unique mobility options. Monks also have a natural affinity for cleave playstyle. With Fist of Fury and other abilities, you kind of do AoE damage to however many enemies in front of you. If you have one enemy, they'll take the full hit. If you have a couple different enemies, they all will take the same damage. So the more enemies you throw in front of the Monk with its cleave playstyle, the better, which is why they are really well suited in cleave playstyle situations and also Mythic Pluses. Monks are also described as a jack of all trades. They're not really a master of anything, but they are pretty good at everything. You want to do single target, they can do pretty well. You want to do big AoE, they can do that. Cleaves, they can do that pretty well. Even splits, where they can send one set of images to one enemy, attack another, and split their damage to enemies that are far apart. There's a variety of different damage profiles the Monks dip their toes into, but that's also their con. Because if you are a jack of all trades, you're not really a master of any. You're not like any of the other classes that are really bursty, or have really good sustain, or are exceptionally good at AoE damage, or exceptionally good at multi-dotting. So Monks kind of dip their toes into parts here and there. They have like a pet combo burst build. They have these images that are AI controlled. They have a variety of cleave / single target naturally baked in abilities, but they're not really exceptionally strong at any aspect, or at least that's how I had it described to me before. Survivability sometimes can be an issue for monks as well. They generally have a variety of different defensives and even more going into this expansion. With talents, you can now overlap a bunch of abilities defensively together, but still monks sometimes fall short in defenses because sometimes you need immunities. And compared to other classes that are similar in terms of playstyle for monk and have similar roles, those classes have immunities where monks don't. And that's definitely something in a lot of people's minds. Is immunity going to be important going into the next expansion? Death Knights are looking very fun going towards into Shadowlands, but how are they doing so far? One of the pros of Death Knights is a grip, which is a massive ability to kind of yoink the enemy to you instead of coming to them. Can be huge in a variety of PvE situations that's solely unique to the Death Knight. Anti-Magic Zone is another great raid and group utility that was added going into this expansion, which is definitely going to give Death Knights a leg up. You also have momentary immunity to movement-based effects. Sometimes Death Knights can avoid knockbacks and slows and allow them a little bit more freedom in certain fights and situations where other classes wouldn't, to be able to get out of the way of bad mechanics. You also have a very decent damage profile, from sustained damage to burst damage to damage over time to a little bit of cleave. Death Knights as a class bring just about every single playstyle available. However, some of the cons of Death Knight is they are wheelchair, which means they are extremely slow. There's a variety of different classes that are very much mobile, inefficient, and usually that ends up being casters, but casters can at least stay at a distance where it's safe. A Death Knight has to get in front of the enemy's face, and if you don't have your mobility available on demand when you need it, or at least plan around mobility cooldowns when you're gonna need it to get out of the way, for Death Knights that can be a pretty big hurdle, and it generally end up being the biggest thing that will really hold you back as a class. Death Knights also have damage tied very much to their cooldowns, whether it's the Armory for Unholy Death Knight or the big frost damage, big burst lineup when it comes to, well, the frost DK. It doesn't really hold the spec back in terms of the damage output, but if you're someone who doesn't really like constant burst and setting up around burst, Death Knight pacing might not be something that might be for you, if that is something you definitely want to consider going forward in terms of how you end up doing your damage. Druids are awesome. They have probably the most versatile toolkit and versatile profile in how they do damage, from dots to big burst to massive cleave, everything you name it, because I mean, if you really need yourself a certain specific playstyle, you just shift into the shapeshift form that you need. Druids also have uncapped AoE, whether you're playing balanced or feral, and with every other class being capped in terms of how much damage they can do to a group of enemies, Druids having this uncapped AoE can give a massive advantage, especially if you go for mad pulls. If you're going to go for big group pulls where you're just going to be dotting everybody up, it's going to be the best time for you, since you're going to be able to hit every enemy while your allies are going to be limited in who they can affect with their cooldowns and setups. I would even describe the utility for Druids as saucy, as in it's very unique and interesting. They are the one class that regularly deals with enrage, which is not a common mechanic, but can definitely screw your group over if you do not pay attention to it. They also have quite a bit of utility with Ursals and knockbacks and roots and bashes, and the utility is saucy because it's not a regular round-of-the-mill everybody has it. They really do have some unique utility that can be extremely good in very specific situations. Your class also generally has powerful big button cooldowns, so when you press your big CD abilities, you will be impactful. You will be doing something with your class. Whether you end up playing Feral or Boomy in the past, when Druids press their big button cooldowns, they generally make a pretty big imprint into any PvE situation they are in. Some of the cons of playing a Druid would be ramp in damage. Druids, whether you balance Druid or Feral, generally has a bit of a slower setup in gameplay. That's because dots and setups for your abilities and getting the setups rolling with whether it's buffing damage or for your Feral Druid, once you get the bleeds rolling in and big shreds and then transition into big bites, it takes a little bit of time before you really see that big damage. Same thing going for Boomy. Now with the Eclipse system, it is going to be a little bit of a slower start. Druid would be a bad choice for someone who wants to be Johnny on the spot. Poppy cooldowns do damage immediately, but if you're someone who wants to cultivate the damage over time, then it's a decent choice. Druids also require a bit of a smart gameplay. When it comes to both Feral and Boomy, your resource management is going to be very important. Knowing your rotation like the back of your hand is going to be almost a must-have when it comes to playing Druid in particular. Not a lot of classes bring in punishing gameplay, but druids have rewarding gameplay the better you are at the class. So I wouldn't really describe it as punishing, but rather they do take time to really get good at. So if you're someone who's looking for a long-term class to really get good at and develop better at over time, Druid might be the perfect for you. But if you're someone who wants to get really good and see results immediately, Druids might not be the best choice. Then we have the Retribution Paladin. Paladins are very, very unique. They have very unique utilities. I mean, Hand of Freedom, Hand of Sacrifice, Blessing of Protection. I mean, those are some of the utilities that other classes don't. Because no other class does what Retribution Paladins can do as a DPS, it definitely makes them extra unique. Paladins bring in very strong defenses for PvE content, with Shield of Vengeance having a splashback effect, but also Bubble, oh, the famous Bubble that allows you to immune certain boss mechanics. I would say the spec is pretty versatile in terms of single target and AoE damage, and being able to kind of shift back and forth between those two profiles on the fly. Also, auras are huge, as auras have been added into this expansion, and for Paladins to bring auras like a 3% damage reduction for your whole group or party, I mean, that is massive utility to bring into a collective. The cons of Paladin is going to be, well, wheelchair. Paladins have mobility from time to time, but they're generally slow. They also don't have a lot of slows to really make sure the enemies are keeping up with their speed, so sometimes enemies will just get away from Paladin's grasp, so planning your mobility ahead is going to be a must. Paladins are also very CD reliant. If you play Paladin, you'll learn really quickly that when you pop wings, that's where most of your damage is going to happen. Outside of wings, however, the damage sometimes can be more, well, it can be a little bit better. It can be a little bit more consistent. It can be a little bit stronger. So if you're someone who doesn't really want to organize a lot of your damage around the big button cooldowns, Paladin might not be a great choice for you. And then we have the Mage, and Mage is looking extra exciting, especially with Arcane going into the next expansion. Mage is a class, I would say, depending on buffs and tuning, of course, but in the past, they generally have really strong burst cooldowns. So Mages will always have that impactful gameplay. If someone needs to die in a dungeon immediately, or if the boss has a mechanic where they'll take extra damage during a short moment, Mages historically have been really good at exploiting those weaknesses and really punishing the enemy. Another thing mages are really good at compared to some of the other casters is mobility. While other casters may sometimes need to stand still and cast, using the talent of Shimmer, or simply using the ability of Blink, allows them to make a quick movement very quickly and go back to casting as soon as possible. They also have quite a bit of good utility with being able to dispel curses, ranged interrupts, roots, slows, as well as an ice block, which is an immunity that can be used in a variety of different situations. If I had to describe mages with one single con, I would say that they are very talent reliant, at least going into Shadowlands. It feels like certain talents make them extremely good at certain aspects. Like, for example, Arcane. If you want to do a lot of AoE damage as Arcane, you will need to commit some talents in order to be decent at Arcane in terms of AoE, or even competitive. As Fire, if you want to have massive single target burst, you will have to sacrifice some cleave capabilities. And with Frost, if you want to do mad AoE or mad single target, being able to choose which talents you need is going to be extra important for you, but it'll also kind of commit you to one specific playstyle or role. So talents can sometimes be a little bit restrictive for mages. Warlocks are looking very unique going into the expansion, primarily with the curses, as curses have been re-added into the game, not just only in PvP. Curses will create quite a bit of utility, and talking about utility for Warlocks that come with a bunch of it, from gateways as well as Hellstones. Warlocks are your best friend when it comes to just about any group content, as they always bring the party favors. Warlock specs also encompass pretty wide circles of damage profiles, as in single target, burst AoE, cleave, multi-dotting. Most specs do really well in almost all aspects of some profiles, maybe -1 that they're really bad at, but in the others they're really good at. So they have a really wide casted net when it comes to different forms of damage they can put out. Warlocks are also generally really tanky, so when it comes to being a caster and taking a lot of hits back to back from enemy mechanics, Warlocks is probably the most durable class that's a range that I would have to recommend if you're someone who wants to take a big beating while also standing your ground, casting spells into the enemy's face. Some of the cons for Warlocks is, let's talk about those damage profiles. So let's say like a spec is really good at like a variety of different things, 4 out of 5, and in that 5th damage profile, maybe let's say multi-dotting, Demonology Warlock, really bad at it. The other parts you're really good at, and one aspect you might be really struggling on. And that's kind of how every spec is. Every spec is generally good at everything but that one thing, and that one thing is what can hold your specs back depending on what the situation is. So if you're in a fight that needs a lot of multi-dotting in your demonology, you're kind of screwed, and affliction and destruction all share similar fates depending on which profile we're looking at. Warlocks also sometimes encourage a very turret style gameplay, so if you're someone who wants to be able to have mobility at all times, not just stand there tunneling spells into an enemy, Warlock might not be a great choice for you. And then we have Demon Hunters. In the past, the Metamorphosis has been a massive ability, allowing you to do insane damage in a very short moment. It's a playstyle where you kind of put your eggs in one basket, but being able to create awesome opportunities with massive Metamorphosis windows can be insanely impactful in just about any PvE situation when you play your Demon Hunter. They also have great survivability, excellent mobility, and they're really good at target swapping. That's one thing that a lot of people will tell you. They're really good at switching targets. They really have no downtime since they can just rush from one enemy to the next, and there's really little downtime between having to run from target to target. Some of the cons of playing a Demon Hunter, I would say there can be somewhat CD reliant. If it's a single target situation, or maybe a big AoE situation that's coming up in just a few moments, having your cooldowns up can give you massive swings of damage, but not being able to manage your big button cooldowns can really make it difficult for you to keep up with others. So if you don't want a class that's very CD oriented and trying to plan your CDs around specific fights and encounters, Demon Hunter might not be a great choice for you. Demon Hunters in Shadowlands looks like there's not too much variety of different talents for you to choose. In some cases you'll be playing one talent in most situations, and that'll be your playstyle, just that one ability, one specific playstyle. If you're someone who likes a buffet of talents where there's a lot of viable options, then Demon Hunters might not be the best choice. Most of the talents are very specialized, so if you're going for a very specific playstyle like mad AoE all the time every minute, there's a talent for it. But if you're not going for very specialized, very unique niche playstyles, your general set of talents for general content will be, at least what's looking like so far in Shadowlands, will be what you'll be running for just about everything. So if you're someone who wants to have a massive variety of different choices, Demon Hunter could potentially not be the best choice for you. And then we have Warriors, and they're spectacular to play right now in pre-patch. Warriors going into Shadowlands are going to have awesome flexible toolkit, and man, Blizzard really did outfit them with a variety of different abilities. They have great mobility, so if you're someone who wants to be able to leap bounds and charge from enemy to enemy, Warriors are great for it. Warriors can do also a lot of good side damage. That means they can focus down on a single target and kind of have splash damage to other enemies around them without any sacrifice in single target capabilities. The base damage profile for Arms Warriors and Fury Warriors before you add any of the talents already gives you a lot of flexibility with a variety of ways to deal with single target situations, AoE situations. There's a lot of ways for you to approach a variety of different PvE content. Some of the cons I would attribute to the Warrior is sometimes your talents can be a little bit too specific. Like certain talents are dominant in specific fights where it's all about cleave or big AoE damage all the time, or fights where it's just two target cleave constantly, or maybe it's a massive execute playstyle, so you'll have a talent that's great in a variety of different situations. Not a great choice for people that want to have multiple different ways to approach a situation and have a lot of different choices based on their preference in playstyle. Also, between two warriors of Arms and Fury, your playstyles can either be very quick with Fury Warrior, just spamming your abilities constantly, or kind of more slow, methodical Arms Warrior. And that's something I noticed in terms of the swings of the speed of the two playstyles. It's not a bad thing, but if you're someone who wants to have a more constant, consistent, somewhat upbeat playstyle, you won't get that with Warrior. You'll either get the massive Roid Rage Berserker, fast-paced, always going ham constantly with Fury, or you'll have a more slower, more methodical playstyle with massive endgame damage with Arms Warrior. When it comes to rogues, there's quite a lot that could be said, but the one thing I will attribute to rogues is they have a pretty good versatile profile when it comes to different damage based on the spec that you play. Subtlety is really good at burst, Outlaw is good at cleave, Assassination is good at single target, and then you have a variety of different specs that are really good at sustain or at single target burst situations. Depending on your playstyle, each spec can offer a variety of different things. Rogues are also extremely good at Mythic Plus, so if you want to do a lot of Mythic Plus dungeons, it definitely should be one of the specs you should consider going forward, because the amount of utility rogues bring in Mythic Pluses in particular is quite huge. I would even say rogues are very survivable. Between Cloak of Shadows, Evasion, and Feint, you actually have quite a lot of utility to survive very dangerous situations, where other classes would sometimes fall over. A rogue might just escape death or even cheat it, and then continue fighting until the very last breath, which can definitely be a very unique experience for you. One of the things I would say about rogues that's a con though is they're very CD reliant or buff reliant. You are going to meet certain checks in order to be able to get the most value out of the damage playstyles that you're looking forward to. Another thing to mention, and this is going to be mostly for you that are raiders, rogues don't bring any raid utility. Where other classes might bring a defensive or some sort of like a way to deal with mechanics a little bit easier, rogues don't bring anything that's unique to the raid content. So justifying your position inside of raids, depending how competitive that spot is, might be difficult, but it all depends on what kind of a team comp you're running, what kind of a combination of classes you guys are going to be rolling. So it all depends on a variety of factors, but definitely something to consider if you're planning to do a lot of raiding going into Shadowlands. Shamans have been an insane amount of fun in the beta, and overall I'm actually very excited to play some Shaman going forward into Shadowlands. Shamans, I would say, have a very unique utility setup. I mean, how many other classes bring totems? How many classes can put a hex on an enemy? How many classes can purge as efficiently as Shamans can? Or have a kick that's a ranged but also is as short as that of a melee? Shamans definitely bring some very unique utility that other classes would not, and they can deal with situations in very interesting styles. For Shamans, your talent options are very specified. If you want to do more single target damage, you have some insanely strong options. If you want to do a lot of cleave damage, you have a la carte of possibilities. And if you want to do a little bit of dip into one part and a little bit of dip in the other to really specialize for a specific dungeon that might have low amount of trash bags but very high single target damage, but you still want to cleave, you could really just kind of customize a lot of aspects of your spec. The base profile for Shaman 2 also generally has the tools already there even before the talents for anything single target oriented, AoE oriented, cleave oriented. It looks like most of that stuff has already been baked into your spec from the get-go. Some of the cons for Shamans though is your survivability is generally on a lower end, sometimes having to be tied to your talents. Your talents actually influence quite a lot of your spec, so survivability could be kind of tricky. And the second negative of Shaman, if I had to pick one, is you are really strong in very specific situations. So if you want to talent yourself to be really good for single target, you'll be probably the best for, let's say, like single target burst situations. Let's say a boss at some point will have some kind of a shield that needs to be broken, and the Shaman will be there, Johnny on the spot, big burst damage when you need it. You'll be perfect for it. But you will be very good at this one thing, but less good at other things. So with Shaman, you are going to end up being a very specialist playstyle, depending on how you end up kind of putting your character together. Man, this list has been pretty long, but we're almost done with the Priest. Primarily talking about this Shadow Priest. Some of the pros of playing Priest, and you should definitely give him a go. Blizzard has really spruced up the playstyle going forward into Shadowlands, and it's a much better playstyle than what you might have played in BFA. Shadow Priests are insanely good at multi-dotting, and that's something they're really good at. Putting dots on multiple enemies, they are, I'd say, the spec that has the easiest time because they have some talents that allow them to spread dots very easily. So have a lot of talent options in terms of adjusting your playstyle. So if you want to be really good at multi-dotting 2 or 3 enemies, you could really just supplement that playstyle. You want to be better at AoE with massive groups of enemies, you could totally go for that as well. Or if you just want to truck down bosses, you have a lot of options in order to get really good at a variety of different things where talents can bolster different aspects of your gameplay. Shadow Priests also come with quite a lot of healing and off healing, as there's not a lot of classes in the game that provide healing besides healers. Shadow Priest with Vampiric Embrace can provide quite a lot of healing, especially if you're going to be using a lot of bursts to AoE groups. Shadow Priests are also pretty good at sustaining themselves together with the Devouring Plague, which literally gives you self-heals when you need it. There's also quite a bit of defensives that also got added to the Priest, and overall they have become a little bit more heal-oriented, which is quite interesting going into this next expansion. Some of the cons of Shadow Priest, well, there's not a lot. I mean, I guess I could say a variety of different things, but the one thing that I will say that they really need to worry about is going to be movement and fights. Movement is very punishing for priests. They really need to turn enemies down. Some priests go even as far as trying to pre-plan all their fights, pre-plan all their movement before a raid, before a dungeon, in order to know exactly where they are going to be and use as many instant cast abilities when you need the movement. Priest is a spec that's really strong, but does require a little bit of preparation if you really want to max it out. So if you're someone who doesn't really want to move around nearly as much and mobility is something you really value, Priest might not be the perfect choice for you. That was a very long video, but I do hope you guys enjoyed it. I just kind of wanted to break down each single class in terms of the DPS aspects that they might be able to bring going forward into the next expansion. It does look like Shadowlands is starting to really form over time, and maybe, just maybe, we might be very, very close to getting a finalized look at Shadowlands. I mean, it's been delayed, but today, or actually yesterday, would have been the time that the expansion would have launched. So from here on out, it's just really a waiting game until we finally get to see the expansion truly released. So how long is it going to be? It could be very, very long, but it could also be a very short time. And picking your main and picking the class you want to play, especially if you're prepared to and you want to play a DPS class going forward, is something that you will need to consider. There are a lot of options to pick from, there are a lot of playstyles to choose, and hopefully this video was just one of those videos that might have made it a little bit easier for you to make that finalized choice. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see all of you in another one.